The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the two-story house on Oak Hill Drive as Officer James Whittaker adjusted his uniform in front of the hallway mirror. His reflection showed a man in his mid-40s with sharp eyes and graying temples that only added to his authoritative appearance. The golden badge on his chest caught the light as he straightened it with practiced fingers. Another day keeping the streets safe, he muttered to himself, a ritual he'd maintained throughout his 15 years on the force. What the mirror didn't reflect was the truth behind the polished image, the casual comments he made at the station about those people from the South Side, the way he followed black shoppers through stores when off duty, or how he'd gotten 3 complaints dismissed through his connections with the police union. The doorbell rang precisely at 8:30 a.m. James opened it to find Amara Johnson standing on his porch, her posture straight despite the obvious nervousness in her eyes. At 23, she carried herself with quiet dignity, wearing simple clothes that were spotlessly clean and neatly pressed. "You must be the new housekeeper," James said, looking her up and down with barely concealed disappointment. The agency hadn't mentioned they were sending someone like her. "Yes, sir, I'm Amara," she replied, her voice steady despite the coldness of his greeting. "The agency said you needed someone 3 days a week." James stepped back without offering his hand. "Fine. Come in." The last girl was lazy, left dust on everything. "I expect better." Amara followed him inside, taking in the spacious home with its expensive furniture and pristine white carpets. Pictures on the wall showed James receiving awards, shaking hands with the mayor, standing proudly with fellow officers. "I work hard, sir," she said simply. "I need this job to help pay for nursing school." James barely acknowledged her words. "Kitchen, living room, dining room, study on this floor. 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms upstairs. My room is off limits unless I specifically ask you to clean it. Cleaning supplies are in this closet. I expect everything spotless." As weeks passed, Amara proved herself an excellent worker, arriving on time and transforming the already clean house into something even more immaculate. She moved quietly through the rooms, dusting shelves lined with law enforcement trophies and framed newspaper clippings of James being described as a community hero. What Amara didn't know was how James talked about her when she wasn't there. "Had to hire a new girl. Yeah, one of those affirmative action types," he told his friend Richard over drinks. "Probably only got into nursing school because of quotas." Richard, another officer, just nodded along. On an unusually warm spring day, Amara arrived to find James home unexpectedly. He sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, his uniform replaced by designer casual wear that probably cost more than Amara made in 2 weeks. "Sir?" "I didn't expect you today," she said, hesitating at the doorway. "Day off," he replied without looking up. "There's a dinner party tonight. Need you to stay late and help serve." "I have class tonight at—" "Double pay," he interrupted, finally meeting her eyes with a look that wasn't exactly a question. Amara thought of her upcoming tuition payment. "Okay," she finally agreed. That evening, as Amara set out crystal glasses for James's guests, all white, all wealthy, she overheard fragments of conversation from the dining room. "These protesters think they know about justice. Need more officers in those neighborhoods. Property values dropping because of those new families moving in." James stood at the head of the table, refilling wine glasses and laughing at jokes that made Amara's skin crawl. When she entered the room with dessert, conversations paused, eyes following her movements with the particular discomfort of people who didn't want the help to hear what they really thought. "Just set it down," James instructed, his tone suddenly professional, different from the man who had been entertaining his friends moments before. As Amara drove home that night, exhaustion settling into her bones, she wondered if the double pay was worth the weight of the unspoken things that filled that house. But her textbooks on the passenger seat reminded her why she needed this job. Just 2 more years of nursing school, she told herself. Just 2 more years until she could leave Officer Whittaker and his beautiful, suffocating house behind for good. 3 months into her job at the Whittaker house, Amara noticed the change. It started small. A sigh of disappointment when she entered the room, a mumbled comment just loud enough for her to hear. By the 4th month, James no longer bothered to hide his true feelings. "You missed a spot," he said one Tuesday morning, running his finger along an already spotless shelf. "I don't pay good money for sloppy work. Amara bit her lip and nodded, returning to clean what was already clean. The truth was, she cleaned his home better than she cleaned her own small apartment, where textbooks and notes often cluttered every surface as she studied into the night after long days of work. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "I'll be more careful." James leaned against the doorframe, watching her with cold eyes. "You people never pay attention to details," he said. "That's why you're cleaning houses instead of owning them." The words stung, but Amara kept her face carefully blank. Each paycheck brought her closer to finishing nursing school. Each insult was just another step on that journey. One rainy afternoon, Amara arrived to find mud tracked across the white carpet in the entryway. She quickly set to work cleaning it before it could stain. "Leave it," James called from his study. "Thomas is coming by to see it." Thomas Chen was another officer from James's precinct, one of the few who still seemed uncomfortable with James's behavior. Amara had noticed how Thomas would avoid eye contact with her when James made his remarks, how his smile never quite reached his eyes during those moments. "See what, sir?" Amara asked, pausing with the cleaning supplies in hand. "The mess you made," James said, stepping into the hallway. "Coming in with your dirty shoes." "Thomas needs to see what I'm dealing with here." "But I just arrived," Amara said, confusion clear in her voice. "Those aren't from me." James's face hardened. "Are you calling me a liar in my own house? Careful, girl. Jobs like this aren't easy to come by for someone with your background." Amara knew what he meant by your background. She'd grown up in an average family in an average neighborhood, her parents both hardworking people who'd saved for years to help with her education. But James saw only what he wanted to see, a stereotype, not a person. When Thomas arrived an hour later, James led him straight to the now-dried mud marks. "See what I mean?" James said loudly, making sure Amara could hear from the kitchen where she was preparing coffee. "No respect for other people's property. Probably thinks I can just buy another carpet." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Maybe it was an accident, James." "Sure, an accident, like the last 3 accidents this month." James's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You're too soft on them, Thomas. That's your problem." Amara's hands trembled slightly as she arranged cookies on a tray. The lies were getting worse, the manufactured evidence of her supposed incompetence mounting week by week. Later that evening, after Thomas had left and James had gone upstairs, Amara found herself alone in the kitchen. On the counter sat James's police cap, left behind as he'd taken a phone call upstairs. Beside it lay his badge, gleaming under the kitchen lights. For a moment, Amara stared at these symbols of authority and protection, things that should have represented justice but now felt like weapons aimed at her. How many others had felt this same powerlessness in the face of that badge? As she heard James's footsteps on the stairs, Amara quickly moved away from the counter. She gathered her things, knowing that tomorrow would bring more of the same. But she also knew that this job was temporary, and her future, her real future, was waiting for her beyond nursing school. What she didn't know was how much worse things would get before she could reach that future. The police department buzzed with excitement on the first Friday in June. Officer James Whitaker had finally received the promotion he'd been chasing for 3 years. Lieutenant Whitaker now, a title he'd practiced saying in the mirror that morning, admiring how the extra stripe looked on his uniform. The celebration started at the station with handshakes and backslaps from fellow officers, continued at Romano's Steakhouse with whiskey and rare steaks, and ended at the Blue Line, a bar where cops gathered after hours. By midnight, James was riding high on praise and alcohol, his face flushed and his words slurring as he ordered another round for his table. "I always knew you'd make lieutenant," said Richard, raising his glass. "To the new boss." James nodded, soaking in the admiration. "About time they recognized talent," he said, loosening his tie. 10 more years, and I'll be running the whole department." By 1 a.m, even Richard suggested it might be time to head home. James waved him off, ordered one last drink, then finally called a rideshare service. The driver helped him inside his house 40 minutes later, leaving him fumbling with his keys at the front door. Inside, the house was dark except for a small lamp in the living room. James stumbled toward it, surprised to find Amara still there, organizing papers at the coffee table. "Why are you still here?" he demanded, his words running together. Amara looked up, startled. You asked me to stay late to prepare for your dinner party tomorrow, she explained, gathering her things quickly. I finished setting the table and polishing the silverware. I was just about to leave. James moved closer, blocking her path to the door. Always the hard worker, he said with a strange smile. That's what I like about you. Amara felt her stomach tighten. In the 6 months she'd worked for him, he'd never once complimented her. The alcohol on his breath filled the space between them. I should go, she said firmly. It's very late. Do you know what happened today? James asked, ignoring her words. I made lieutenant. Everyone's showing me respect today. His eyes narrowed. Everyone except you. Congratulations, sir, Amara said quickly. That's wonderful news. James stepped closer. Don't just say it, show it. What happened next remained blurry in Amara's memory later. She remembered trying to step around him, remembered his hand gripping her wrist so hard it left marks, remembered how his authority and position suddenly felt like a wall closing in around her. Please don't, she had said, her voice steady despite her fear. This isn't right. For a moment, something flickered in James's eyes, perhaps recognition of a line being crossed. But then it disappeared, washed away by alcohol and years of seeing people like Amara as less than human. The next morning, Amara sat in her car outside her apartment building for nearly an hour, unable to make herself go inside. How could she tell anyone what happened? Who would believe her word against his? He was now Lieutenant Whittaker, respected, decorated, connected. She was just a housekeeper working her way through school. She considered going to the police, but the thought of walking into that station, possibly facing the same men who had celebrated with James just hours before, made her physically ill. She thought about calling the housekeeping agency, but she needed the job, needed the money. Her tuition payment was due in 3 weeks. So Amara did what many women in impossible situations have done throughout history. She went back to work on Monday, head high, emotions locked away, determined to survive. She arrived early, cleaned everything twice, and left before James returned home. Tuesday followed the same pattern, and Wednesday and Thursday. For 3 weeks, Amara managed to avoid being alone with James. She cleaned while he was at work, left notes about completed tasks, and disappeared before he came home. James left her checks on the kitchen counter, and life continued in this careful, brittle balance. Then came the morning when Amara woke up feeling sick for the 3rd day in a row. The morning when she couldn't keep down breakfast. The morning when she finally bought a pregnancy test during her lunch break and sat in a public restroom stall, watching with growing horror as 2 pink lines appeared in the little window. Pregnant. Amara pressed her hands against her mouth to hold back a sob. After everything she'd endured, after all her careful planning for the future, after all her hard work, this single terrible moment threatened to destroy it all. For 3 days, Amara carried the weight of her secret like a stone in her chest. She cleaned James's house mechanically, her mind far away as she dusted shelves and scrubbed floors. Each evening, she researched her options in her small apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating her tired face until the early hours. On Friday morning, her decision made, Amara arrived at work earlier than usual. She needed to speak with James before he left for his shift. The pregnancy was now 7 weeks along according to her calculations. She couldn't wait any longer. The kitchen clock ticked loudly as she prepared his usual coffee. At 7:15, she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she set the mug on the counter. "Sir," she began as James entered the kitchen, already in his crisp uniform. "I need to speak with you about something important." James barely looked at her as he grabbed the coffee. "Make it quick. I have a meeting at 8. Could we sit down?" Amara asked, gesturing toward the kitchen table. Something in her tone made him pause. He studied her face for a moment, then reluctantly sat. "What is it?" he asked, checking his watch. Amara took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, watching his face closely. For a moment, James froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips. Then his expression darkened. "And you're telling me because—" "Because you're the father," she said, holding his gaze despite the fear fluttering in her stomach. "That night after your promotion." James set his mug down with a sharp crack. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, but his eyes darted away from hers. "You're trying to trap me. How dare you make up such lies?" "I'm not lying," Amara said steadily. "I haven't been with anyone else." "I thought you should know." "Know what?" James cut her off, standing so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That you're trying to ruin my career, my reputation, that you want money?" "I just wanted to talk about what we sold." "There is no we here," James shouted, his face reddening. "There never was. You're a housekeeper, for God's sake." The contempt in his voice was like a slap. Amara flinched but stayed seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted," she began again. "But you planned this," James accused, pacing now. "You saw my promotion, my new salary, and thought you'd cash in. Women like you always looking for a payday. Women like me." Amara repeated, a spark of anger finally breaking through her fear. "You know exactly what I mean," James spat. He stopped pacing suddenly, a cold calculation replacing his rage. "You're fired." Amara blinked, caught off guard by the abrupt shift. "What?" "You're fired, right now. Pack your things and get out of my house." "You can't just." "I can and I am," James said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "And let me make something perfectly clear. If you try to tell anyone about this ridiculous story, if you try to claim this situation has anything to do with me, I will make your life a living hell." He leaned closer, the smell of his aftershave mixed with coffee making Amara's already sensitive stomach roll. "Do you understand who I am in this town?" he continued. "Lieutenant James Whittaker. My father played golf with the mayor. My uncle is a judge. I have friends in every department that matters. Who do you think people will believe? A decorated police officer or a cleaning girl making wild accusations?" The ugliness behind his polished facade was fully visible now, like looking at the back of a movie set, all raw wood and support beams where the audience expected something beautiful. "I just thought you should know about your child," Amara said, standing up slowly. "That's all." "It's not mine," James insisted. "And if you say it is, you'll regret it. No one will hire you. No hospital will accept you as a nurse after I'm done talking to the right people. Is that clear?" Amara felt a chill at the casual way he threatened her future, her dreams. This was the real power he wielded, not just the badge or the gun, but the connections, the privilege, the ability to be believed simply because of who he was. "I'll get my things," she said quietly. James walked to his desk in the living room and returned with a checkbook. He scribbled quickly and tore out a check, throwing it onto the kitchen table. 2 weeks severance. More than you deserve. Don't come back here. Don't call. Don't contact me in any way. Amara left the check where it lay, gathering only her purse and cardigan. At the door, she paused, one hand resting lightly on her stomach. "You know the truth," she said without turning around. "And someday so will everyone else." She closed the door softly behind her, stepping into the bright morning sunshine that felt at odds with the darkness she carried inside. In her car, parked under the maple tree at the curb, Amara finally let the tears come, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel as sobs shook her body. She was alone now, unemployed, pregnant, afraid. But something else stood beneath the fear, a quiet, steady resolve. James Whittaker had taken enough from her. He wouldn't take anything more. Amara's apartment felt smaller than usual that evening. She sat on her worn sofa, staring at the wall without really seeing it, a cold cup of tea forgotten on the coffee table. The events of the morning played on repeat in her mind. James's anger, his threats, the slam of her car door as she drove away from his house for the last time. Her phone buzzed. The third call from her older sister, Keisha, in the past hour. Amara had ignored the first two, but this time she picked up. "Hey," she said, her voice flat. "Girl, what's going on?" Keisha demanded. "I've been calling you. Are you okay?" Amara opened her mouth to say she was fine, her automatic response to everything, but instead a sob escaped. Once it started, she couldn't stop, the tears coming in waves that left her gasping for breath. "I'm coming over," Keisha said firmly. "Don't move." 30 minutes later, Amara sat at her small kitchen table across from her sister, who listened without interruption as the whole story poured out. The job, the abuse, the night of the promotion, the pregnancy, and finally, that morning's confrontation. When Amara finished, Keisha reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "First thing," she said, her voice gentle but determined, "you are not alone in this. Not for 1 second. I lost my job, Keisha. I can't pay tuition. I can't afford a baby. And if I try to get child support, he'll ruin my life." You didn't see his face. "Men like him count on fear," Keisha cut in. "They count on shame and isolation. That's how they keep getting away with it." Amara shook her head. "He's a lieutenant now. Who's going to believe me?" "More people than you think," Keisha replied. She pulled out her phone and started typing. "Remember my friend Tanya who works at the community center? They have a legal aid office there. Lisa Chen is the lawyer who runs it. She specializes in workplace abuse cases." "I can't afford a lawyer," Amara protested. "It's free," Keisha explained, "for situations exactly like this." The next morning, Amara found herself sitting across from Lisa Chen in a small but tidy office at the West Side Community Center. Lisa was in her late 30s, with straight black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She took notes as Amara repeated her story, occasionally asking for clarification but never once showing doubt. "What do you want to happen here?" Lisa asked when Amara finished. "That's where we need to start." Amara hadn't expected this question. She'd been so focused on surviving that she hadn't thought beyond the next day. I don't know," she admitted. "It's okay," Lisa assured her. "Let's break it down. Do you want to keep the baby?" Amara's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Despite everything, she knew the answer. Yes. "Do you want James to be involved?" "No," Amara said immediately. "But I need financial support. I can't do this alone." Lisa nodded. "Do you want him to face consequences for how he treated you?" This question was harder. Part of Amara wanted to simply move on, to focus on her future and her child's future. But another part of her remembered his smug certainty that he was untouchable. "Yes," she finally said, "not just for me, for anyone else he might hurt." "Then we have a path forward," Lisa said decisively. "First, we document everything. Every text, every email, every date and time you can remember of significant interactions. Then we gather evidence to support your account." "But I don't have any evidence," Amara said, feeling hopeless again. "You'd be surprised," Lisa replied with a small smile. "Did you ever text friends about his behavior? Did you take any pictures of the house that might have him in the background? Did you ever record a conversation because you were worried about what he might say?" Amara thought for a moment. "I did take pictures of the rooms after I cleaned them to prove I'd done a good job. He's in some of them, I think. And I kept all my pay stubs and the employment contract." "That's a start," Lisa said encouragingly. "And we'll find more. Also, I'm going to connect you with Dr. Powell at the Women's Clinic. She can document your pregnancy and help with prenatal care." For the first time since the pregnancy test, Amara felt a flicker of hope. Having a plan, having support, it changed everything. As they wrapped up the meeting, Lisa handed Amara a card for a support group that met on Wednesday evenings. "It might help to talk to other women who've dealt with workplace abuse," she suggested. The following Wednesday, Amara hesitated outside the community center's meeting room. Through the partly open door, she could hear quiet conversation. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach, now beginning to show the slightest curve. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Inside, 6 women of different ages and backgrounds sat in a circle of chairs. They looked up as she entered, and a woman with silver-streaked brown hair smiled warmly. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Diane. We were just getting started." Amara took the empty seat they offered. As each woman shared her story, Amara felt something shift inside her. These women understood. They'd faced their own James Whittakers, men who had used power, position, and privilege as weapons. Yet here they were, supporting each other, fighting back, rebuilding their lives. When her turn came, Amara started slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. But with each word, her voice grew stronger. She wasn't just a victim in this story, she was a survivor. And she wasn't alone anymore. Alex Rivera unpacked boxes in his new living room, occasionally glancing out the window at the impressive house next door. As a journalist for the City Tribune, he'd heard stories about Lieutenant James Whittaker, the department's rising star with the spotless record. Too spotless, perhaps. In his 10 years covering the police beat, Alex had learned that perfect records often hid the deepest flaws. He'd been working on a series about police misconduct for months, gathering testimonies from people who'd encountered the darker side of law enforcement. Lieutenant Whittaker's name had come up twice in his interviews, nothing concrete enough to print, just whispers and suspicions. Not yet, anyway. That Saturday morning, 3 weeks after moving in, Alex was watering plants on his porch when he noticed a young black woman walking quickly from Whittaker's front door. Even from a distance, her distress was obvious, shoulders hunched, face streaked with tears, one hand pressed against her stomach as she hurried to her car. Behind her, Whittaker appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with anger as he shouted something Alex couldn't quite hear. The scene lasted only moments before the woman drove away and Whittaker slammed his door, but it left Alex uneasy. Something was wrong in that house. 2 days later, Alex introduced himself to Whittaker at the neighborhood barbecue. "Good to meet you, Lieutenant. I've heard great things about your work with the department." Whittaker shook his hand firmly, all charm and easy confidence. "Just doing my job, keeping our streets safe." "I noticed your housekeeper left in quite a hurry the other day," Alex said casually, watching Whittaker's reaction. "Everything okay?" For just a second, the lieutenant's smile faltered. "Had to let her go. Caught her stealing. You know how it is. You try to help people, give them opportunities, and they take advantage." The lie came so easily that Alex might have believed it if he hadn't seen the woman's face that day. "That's unfortunate," he replied, matching Whittaker's casual tone while making a mental note to dig deeper. It took Alex 3 days to find Amara Johnson. His contacts at the housekeeping agency were reluctant to share information at first, but Alex's reputation for protecting his sources eventually convinced them. When he called the number they provided, a woman's voice answered warily. "Ms. Johnson? My name is Alex Rivera. I'm a journalist with the City Tribune. I live next door to James Whittaker, and I saw what happened the day you left. I'd like to hear your side of the story." There was a long pause before Amara responded. "I can't talk about this," she said finally. "He'll make sure no one believes me." "I might," Alex said gently. "I've been investigating police misconduct for months. Your story could be important." Another pause. "I have a lawyer now," Amara said. "I should talk to her first." "Of course," Alex agreed. "Have her call me." The next day, Lisa Chen contacted Alex. After a lengthy discussion about Amara's rights and how her story would be handled, they arranged a meeting at the community center, neutral ground where Amara would feel safe. When Alex arrived, he found not only Amara and Lisa waiting for him, but also a woman named Vanessa Taylor, a former police administrative assistant who had her own story about Lieutenant Whittaker. "He cornered me in the file room 2 years ago," Vanessa explained, her voice steady but her hands fidgeting with her watch strap. "When I reported it, his friends in internal affairs buried the complaint. I was transferred to another precinct, and the whole thing disappeared." Alex took detailed notes as both women shared their experiences. Patterns emerged: the abuse of power, the threats, the certainty of protection from consequences. As a journalist, he'd encountered similar stories before, but the specific details about Whittaker painted a picture of a man who believed himself untouchable. "I'm going to need evidence beyond testimonies," Alex explained when they finished. "People like Whittaker are protected by the system. We need something concrete." Lisa nodded. "We're building a case." Amara has employment records, text messages, photos. Vanessa has her original complaint and emails from the time of her transfer. "And I have sources inside the department," Alex added. "Officers who are uncomfortable with the culture of protection but afraid to speak out. This could be the push they need." As they talked, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from her doctor's office. She read it, then looked up with a mix of emotions on her face. "The DNA test results came back," she said quietly. "It confirmed James is the father." Alex saw the journalistic significance immediately. "With your permission, that test could be crucial evidence, both for your legal case and for my investigation." Over the next few weeks, Alex worked closely with Lisa, building a comprehensive picture of James Whittaker's misconduct. 3 more women came forward after hearing about Amara's case through Lisa's network: a bartender at the Blue Line, a neighbor's college-aged daughter, and another former housekeeper who'd quit years earlier. "They're all telling the truth," Vanessa confirmed when Alex shared the new accounts. The details matched too perfectly to be coincidence. As Alex gathered evidence, Lisa filed Amara's civil case. The court documents became public record, accessible to anyone willing to look. And people were looking now, including Internal Affairs Detective Olivia Washington, who had been waiting years for a chance to clean up her department. "I need to go on record with what I know," Detective Washington told Alex during a confidential meeting. "Whitaker isn't just abusing women. He's falsifying reports, targeting Black and Hispanic drivers for unwarranted stops, and sharing seized property with his friends in the department." The dam was breaking. What had begun with one woman's courage was becoming something larger, a reckoning not just for James Whitaker, but for the entire system that had protected him for so long. Rain pattered against the windows of the police headquarters as Chief Howard opened the sealed Internal Affairs report. His face grew grimmer with each page he turned. Across the desk, Detective Washington sat quietly, her posture straight, her expression professional despite the tension in the room. "You're sure about all of this?" the chief asked finally, looking up. "Every word," Detective Washington confirmed. "We have testimonies, documents, recordings, and digital evidence. Lieutenant Whitaker's misconduct goes beyond the personal accusations. It extends to abuse of power, falsified reports, racial profiling, and misappropriation of seized property." The chief sighed heavily, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. "I've known James since he was a rookie. His father was my friend." "With respect, sir," Washington replied carefully, "friendship shouldn't shield anyone from accountability." Outside in the hallway, James Whitaker paced impatiently, unaware that his carefully constructed world was crumbling. He'd been summoned without explanation, told only to wait. For a man accustomed to giving orders, taking them didn't come easily. When he was finally called in, the chief's grave expression told him something was seriously wrong. "Sit down, James," Chief Howard said, gesturing to a chair. "I'd prefer to stand," Whitaker replied, his usual confidence tinged with uncertainty. "What's this about?" "You're being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. I need your badge and your service weapon." The color drained from Whitaker's face. "What? Why? Is this about that housemaid's ridiculous claims? She's lying, trying to extort money." "This is about multiple complaints spanning years," the chief interrupted. "Internal Affairs has been building a case. Your badge and gun, Lieutenant." For a moment, Whitaker seemed unable to move. Then, slowly, his hand went to his hip holster. As he placed his weapon and badge on the desk, his fingers trembled slightly, the first crack in his composure. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice hardening. "I've given everything to this department. My record is spotless." "No, James," the chief replied quietly. "Your record appears spotless because people have been cleaning up after you for years. That stops today." Across town in the courthouse, Amara sat beside Lisa Chen as the judge reviewed their petition. Now 5 months pregnant, Amara had a new job at a small medical office and had resumed her nursing classes part-time. The baby, a girl, according to her latest ultrasound, kicked occasionally as if emphasizing the importance of this moment. Based on the evidence presented, the judge announced, the court grants the emergency protective order and approves the petition for paternity and support. The defendant is ordered to submit to DNA testing if he has not already done so and to provide support commensurate with his income. Lisa squeezed Amara's hand gently. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, "but it's a good beginning." Outside the courtroom, they met Alex, who had news of his own. "My editor approved the investigation for Sunday's front page. Whitaker's been placed on leave, and 3 other officers are being questioned about related misconduct." "Will it make a difference?" Amara asked, one hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "It already has," Alex assured her. "Internal Affairs is reviewing every case Whitaker handled in the last 5 years. And the women who came forward after you, they're finding their voices too." In the weeks that followed, James Whitaker's life unraveled thread by thread. The DNA test results became part of the public record, confirming his paternity despite his continued denials. His fellow officers, once friendly, now avoided eye contact in public places. The Internal Affairs investigation expanded to include officers who had helped cover his tracks. The City Tribune's expose detailed not only his personal misconduct, but the systemic problems that had allowed it to continue. Finally, on a cool autumn morning, James Whittaker was formally charged with multiple offenses including official misconduct, falsification of reports, and misappropriation of evidence. As he was escorted from his home, the same home where he had once lauded his power over Amara, news cameras captured the moment. The lieutenant's shoulders were slumped, his expression stunned, as if he still couldn't believe this was happening to him. One camera caught sight of Amara watching from a distance, standing beside her sister Keisha. She didn't cheer or show satisfaction as some onlookers did. She simply watched, one hand on her now prominent belly, her face solemn but calm. "You okay?" Keisha asked softly. "Yes," Amara replied. "It's not about revenge. It's about truth, about consequences." 3 months later, on a bright winter day, Amara held her newborn daughter in the hospital room filled with flowers from her support group, her classmates, and her new coworkers. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around Amara's thumb as she slept, peaceful and perfect. Liza arrived with news. Whittaker had accepted a plea deal that would keep him from returning to law enforcement. The financial settlement from Amara's civil case would provide for her and her daughter's future. And most importantly, the police department had implemented new accountability policies, dismantling the system that had protected abusers for so long. "Your courage changed things," Lisa told her, gazing at the sleeping baby. "Not just for yourself, but for others." Amara looked down at her daughter's face, the future she was fighting for, the reason she had found strength when she thought she had none left. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the scales balance only when someone is brave enough to tip them."